Hi everyone, I'm Miranda and welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm sorry it's been so long since the last time I did a video. A lot has changed for me since then, and I rather foolishly thought that I could carry on recording and doing videos with like my whole life changing around me. That was very naive and I wasn't able to do that. So apologies for the long break, but I'm so excited to get back to YouTubing regularly now and to sharing with you all of the wonderful books that I've been reading. But first, how has my life changed? Well, I moved from London to Yorkshire with my mum. We moved at the end of June to a lovely house right in the middle of the countryside. I mean, it's from one extreme to another, moving from a tiny, really noisy flat in almost central London to moving to the depths of the countryside and having a lot of space and just also a lot of emptiness around us. I'm absolutely loving it. London was not a pleasant place to be during lockdown, and that whole experience was part of what just really motivated both my mum and me to say, let's do something different. Why don't we move? And I'm so glad that we just took the plunge, and we had to do it. You know, we couldn't actually even view any of the properties we were looking at because lockdown was really still in full force at that point, and it was quite a nerve-wracking decision. But like I said, I love Yorkshire. I'm so happy to be here. I can't wait to share some of my life in the countryside with you all. I'm still in the midst of buying bookcases. I'm actually getting some built, and I'm hoping that one is arriving by the end of this week. So if it does, then I'll try and film that and me organising my books and things like that. There's just so much basically that I can't wait to share with you. I'm so excited about this, and yeah, I can't wait to share more of the countryside as well as the wonderful books that I'm reading. So I hope you'll enjoy following along this new stage in my life too. If you want a bit of a sneak peek or like a glimpse of my life in Yorkshire, then I did do a little video. It's the video just before this one. I'll put a link to it in the description box down below, because I filmed just a few snippets of the sort of surrounding countryside and basically a bit of what I've been getting up to enjoying over the summer. So they're just a few scenes basically from my life that I've put together to some music. So if you fancy having a watch, then please do. But yes, I'm also looking forward to just getting back to vlogging and doing regular videos from now on. So let's get on with it. I've got so many books to catch you up on. This is just going to be a part one of the books I've read lately. And what I've done is I've decided to share the really summary books that I read lately with you all. I'm such a seasonal reader. I love reading sort of in harmony with the current season. It just enhances my life and my enjoyment of that season if I read books that are really set in that particular season at the time. So I always do make an effort to have some seasonal reads on the go, and I chose some very summary books. Some were rereads and some weren't, that I wanted to read this summer. So let me share them with you. First up is The Greengage Summer by Rumer Godden. I love this tiny little Pang Macmillan edition, I think called Macmillan Collector's Library. Yes, these are all like pocket-sized books, so really lovely. I'd first read this as a teenager, but it had been years since I read it, and I remember really enjoying it and I wanted to reread it. I'm so glad I did. This is such a magical book. I highly recommend reading it if you haven't already. It's about a family so a sort of group of children, a group of siblings who go with their mother to France one summer, having never travelled out of the UK before. Their mother falls ill and has to go to hospital, so the children are very much left to their own devices, rambling around this huge sort of chateau slash hotel in the French countryside, gorging themselves on greengages in the orchard. And what's really fascinating about this is that some of the events in this novel are actually based on Rumer Godden's own life and her own family's trip to France. It's a real coming of age story. The two young women that this book particularly revolves around are two sisters. One is kind of just on the brink of becoming a woman, and she's just sort of on the brink of puberty. Her older sister catches the attention of almost every man in the hotel, but one Englishman in particular. And it's how this man affects the children, about what happens to him and the events that happen in that summer that form the basis of this really unforgettable story. I loved it. It's a brilliant coming of age story, and it's just the type of tale that really sticks in your mind. Like I said, I remembered that I loved it when I read it as a teenager. I think I enjoyed reading it even more as an adult, and it's just a very, very good summer read as well. And if you're a Francophile like I am, then it's a good book for that as well. Okay, so reading the Greengage Summer kind of got me on a bit of a reading theme of sort of hot summer days coupled with the loss of innocence, coupled with sort of coming of age stories and troubled romance specifically. So after the Greengage Summer, I read The Go-Between by L.P. Hartley, which I've been wanting to read for a very long time. I'm so glad that I finally did. Loads of people love this book, and I thought it was amazing. It is such a classic. I'm so glad that I read it. It has one of the very most famous opening lines, which is, "The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there." That's just from the prologue. I think that instantly pulls you in, doesn't it? And you just want to know what happened in the past. What is this story going to be about? Again, it's a coming of age novel. It's about a young boy who goes to stay with a school friend of his over the summer in his big sort of country mansion in the English countryside. And this sort of, I think he's about 13 in the book. He's still very much a schoolboy, but he's just starting to become aware of the adults around him. And he particularly becomes aware of the family's oldest daughter in the book, who's a very beautiful young woman. And he becomes a go-between between this young woman and a sort of farmer, a neighbouring farmer in the district, who's this very virile, very attractive young man, but of a very different social class from his school friend's sister. And as you can imagine, things take a turn for the worst. And I can't remember what his name is. Leo, Leo. That's actually quite an important name in a way to remember from this book. If you've read it, you'll know what I mean. And it's very appropriate being a summer book too, in sort of months of the summer. So yes, young Leo becomes a go-between between these two adults, passing messages back and forth. And he's very innocent. He doesn't understand the sort of love triangle that he's caught up in, because the young girl, I think she's called Marion. Yes, Marion, is actually just about to become engaged to someone of her own sort of social class and who her parents want her to marry. So there's a love triangle going on that young Leo just isn't aware of. But it all suddenly reaches boiling point just as the days sort of heat up, the thermometer rises higher and higher. Everything also reaches a boiling point too. And it's just such a good book. Do read it. I absolutely loved it. After that, continuing the same sort of theme, I read Atonement by Ian McEwan. And I've got mixed feelings about this book. I know so many people love it. Let me know if you're one of those people, or if you're a bit on the fence about it too. I mean, I think it's a brilliant story. I think actually I did read this before, but weirdly I find this book quite forgettable. I'd also seen the film and I couldn't remember anything about it whatsoever apart from Keira Knightley in that green dress. The dress really stuck in my mind, but that's kind of it. And yeah, for some reason, I find the story quite forgettable. I think it's partly because the ending really annoys me. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but I don't like the ending. And I think when I get to the ending each time, I kind of just then blank the rest of the book because it annoys me so much. But this is also an amazing summer read. I mean, the first sort of half of the book is set on this boiling hot summer's day, and it's about a young girl who watches from the window her sister's apparently random act of stripping off her dress and diving into a fountain in their garden to retrieve this vase, or a piece of a vase that's fallen into the fountain. And she's with a young man, a sort of young friend of the family. The sister watching this doesn't understand the circumstances. She also doesn't understand that her sister and this young man are actually, in fact, in love. And the young sister becomes so sort of confused by all of the adult things that are sort of happening around her that she thinks she understands, but in fact she doesn't, that she makes an extremely unfortunate, catastrophic, actually, mistake. And this mistake damages the lives of everyone around her. So it's a really heartbreaking story. It really does break your heart a bit, I think, this one. And like I said, I don't love the ending. Not that I always have to have books that are only really happy, but I just find this book frustrating. I don't think it quite had to in the way that it did. But it's definitely still worth a read. An amazing summer story, and also it ties in so well with this theme of sort of loss of innocence and sort of coming of age. So I recommend that one too. Oh yes, then I reread The Owl Service by Alan Garner, which actually also ties in with this theme very well too. It's a children's book, but because it really is about a group of adolescents, but it's a book that adults would absolutely love too. There is so much to this story, and I really enjoyed rereading it. Again, I read it as a child, but I predominantly just remembered being really frightened by it. It is quite an eerie story, and reading it now as an adult, I was much more aware of, again, this kind of sort of almost not exactly a love triangle, but these three sort of main central characters who revolve around each other and damage each other in some ways too. And I really enjoyed reading this again. Like I said, it's a very good summer read. It's set in a sort of very hot few days at a sort of old house in Wales. And the young girl discovers a sort of china service of plates, and they're patterned with owls. And she thinks that she has to draw these owls, and as she draws owls, they sort of disappear from the plates, and it's all tied up with sort of Welsh mythology, and it's a fascinating read. It's really gripping, and yeah, brilliant summer read and just an unforgettable book. A children's classic for a reason, but adults would love it too. And yes, it's just really about what happens to this group of children when they unleash this sort of magic that's been caught up in the plates, that's been caught up with owls and a woman from long ago. And yeah, it is still actually quite a scary read, but really good. And then another brilliant summer's book I read is One Fine Day by Molly Panter Downs. I really have been wanting to read this book for a long time. So many people have raved about it, and I agree with them. I think it's a fantastic book, a real sort of classic of the 20th century, in fact, and I think more people should know about this. And if you're a fan of sort of Barbara Pym, Elizabeth Taylor, Persephone books, then I think you would really love this book. Again, it's a brilliant summer's read. It's set on a single day in June, just after World War II, in this sort of sleepy English country village, not too far from London. And it's very much about how the world has sort of completely changed after the end of the war. And a young wife is sort of trying to make ends meet and run this huge old house for which there's no longer the staff, and that she really sort of can't handle by herself. It was fascinating getting that insight into like domestic detail basically from that time, and how just exhausting it was keeping up with all of the chores really that having a big house in the country, or even just a fairly normal house in the country, entailed. So she and her husband are sort of trying almost to hold on to this lost world that really is over. And I think through the book, the wife at least comes to a real acceptance that it's time to move on into the future when things will be different. I love books that are set only in one day. I think that that's always a mark of a very clever novelist who's able to do that. And Molly Panther-Downs is an amazing writer. I love this for all of the descriptions of nature, of the English countryside that are in this book. There's just this magical quality somehow to it. And it's the perfect book to just kind of sit out on the lawn in a deck chair or something and read it in a day too. It's very slight, so it's easy to do that. So next summer, add this one to your list if you haven't already read it. Another very slim and fun book is Maigret Sets a Trap by George Simenon. I really love the Maigret books. This one is a good summer's read because it's set in August. And Paris in the heat wave. Maigret is a French detective based in Paris, and in this book he's on the track of a serial killer who's sort of killing lots of women around Paris. And the Maigret books I always enjoy because there's quite a psychological element always to, well, the murderer or to the crime, and I enjoy that about these. I also just love getting that taste of Paris. Yeah, it's really brilliant for that, and I was definitely transported to Paris as I read this, and it was just a really fun light read. And then another reread for me was A Tess of the Derbyvilles by Thomas Hardy. I loved returning to this book. I hadn't read it since I was a teenager, and I was just so glad to return to it. It's a wonderful summer's read. Some of the most famous scenes, like when Tess gathers strawberries at the start of the book that are rather forced upon her, and the May dance scene at the beginning, all of the scenes set in the dairy that are so redolent of summer and of blossoming love. Yes, it's just a wonderful book to read in the summertime, and I think it's such a shame that I think quite a few people read Tess of the Derbyvilles in school when they were young, and it kind of ruined it for them. I'm such a big fan of Hardy. He seems to have fallen a little bit out of fashion lately, which I think is such a shame. I really encourage you to read Thomas Hardy's books if you haven't before. Tess of the Derbyvilles is one of my favourites, and I also love Far from the Madding Crowd, which I want to reread next. I'm so enjoying returning to his books actually now that I'm living in the country, because he is such an amazing writer of the countryside, especially of a lost English countryside. And he writes local dialect so well. He's of course a Dorset writer. He was a famous Dorset writer, and my mum was from Dorset. I've got very many happy memories from Dorset. I've been to Hardy's cottage in Dorset, but he's also just a wonderful writer of the English countryside generally. His descriptions of nature are amazing. I mean, Thomas Hardy was, of course, a famous poet as well, and that poetry, that language really comes over in his prose as well as his poetry. It's just, there's so many beautiful descriptions of nature in this, and that's part of what makes it a wonderful summer's read, I think, too. And yes, I just appreciated it even more now that I'm living in the countryside. So if you've never read Test the Derbyvilles, or you think you hate it, give it another try. I loved returning to it. Then a non-fiction book, but a brilliant summer's read, is British Summertime Begins by Ascenda Maxstone Graham. I love Ascenda's writing. She wrote a book called Terms and Conditions, which was essentially about what the real life Mallory Towers would have been like. In that book, Ascenda interviewed loads of old boarding school girls and uncovered the horrors, frankly, of their boarding schools. But she's got such a great sense of humour, very sort of British sense of humour, but she just has this incredible eye, really, for the sort of wacky, the funny, the bizarre, the horrific. And I laughed out loud reading Terms and Conditions, and I laughed out loud reading this book too. This deals with the school summer holidays from 1930 to 1980, and again, Ascenda interviewed many different people and asked them about their childhood summers, what they remembered of them. And she sort of found these really interesting commonalities between people's experiences. And it was quite poignant, actually, reading this book, because you realise that the type of summer I had, and I was born after her cut-off date, but even in my youth, I had quite a bit of freedom. No, I certainly couldn't go off on my own roaming around woods all day. My mum would have had a fit, and that's what many of the children in this book did. But I was able to play with children in the cul-de-sac outside of our house. I definitely was allowed freedom, and I felt very free as a child. I could do whatever I wanted with those long summer days. You know, summer just felt like forever. It was amazing. And it was in the days before smartphones, of course, before, glued to a screen. And I just read so many books in my childhood and just relished being able to do whatever I wanted with my time. And I think that sense of having endless days filled with nothing, really, and even the ability to be bored and to get yourself out of boredom by finding something that interests you, I think that's sort of lost for children today, which is so sad. So that's why reading this was quite poignant in a way, because I think you realise, at least people of my age and older, realise how special our childhoods were in that way, in the freedom that we had, and that the world has really changed so much since then. Some things, of course, are a lot better, and there's certainly a lot of just freezing in the sea and parental neglect, frankly, and a lot of not looking back with rose-coloured spectacles at all in this too. But it's just a wonderful read, perfect summer book, and I highly recommend it. Fairly early on in the summer, I read Bitter Orange by Claire Fuller, and I really enjoyed it. This is quite a dark, sort of twisted tale. It's a great crumbling country mansion type of book. It's about a woman who is employed to go to this sort of crumbling old house in the English countryside that an American has bought, and he wants her to sort of write up about some of the architecture of this house that he's bought and that he's never seen. So she's a sort of typical, spinster character, in that she comes across as very highly introverted, but in a way that is quite anti-social. And when she arrives at this house, she realises that she won't be the only occupant, but in fact 2 other people have been employed by its owner to catalogue the interiors. and they're a young couple, and she instantly gets sort of drawn into their world. At first, she's just overjoyed to have made friends with this sort of glamorous pair. But things take a darker twist when she realizes that there's a loose floorboard in her bathroom that has this sort of keyhole, like a spy hole, drilled into it, and she can see into their bathroom down below. And she just becomes more and more involved in this couple who clearly have a lot going on, shall we say, themselves. And it's a brilliant example of an unreliable narrator. I always enjoy books that have unreliable narrators. It's set in the summer, and which makes it a great summer read. It's a great book if you love sort of country house stories with a bit of gothic thrown in. There's some amazing descriptions of food in this book too, and all three of them together end up living this very sort of hedonistic lifestyle where there's fine wine and they drink all of these expensive wines, and they order in the most sort of exotic ingredients. It's set, I think, in the 1970s or 1960s. 1969, that's when it's set. So it sort of evokes that era too. And you know, when eating things like pasta was considered very exotic. And I really enjoyed that, and it reminded me of We Have Always Lived in the Castle, partly for that reason, with the sort of incredible descriptions of food. That's another favourite book of mine, very creepy, and I think Claire Fuller read it before writing this. I think maybe that partly inspired this a bit. But yes, I definitely recommend this. Really, really good. I did see the twist at the end. I will say that. There is a bit of a twist at the end, and I definitely did see that coming, which is a bit of a shame, but I still really enjoyed it. And then finally, I read The Golden Rule by Amanda Craig. I wanted to read this in the summer because it's about a Cornish summer, essentially, and I love Cornwall, and I know so many people go to Cornwall in the summertime, so I thought this would be a fun read. This is definitely probably not Cornwall maybe as you picture it, as this beautiful glamorous summer location, but a much darker version. Amanda Craig was partly inspired by Strangers on a Train when she wrote this, and the book starts out with two women seemingly meeting by pure chance on a train as heading down from London to Penzance. And both women start talking to each other, and they realise that they have these horribly abusive husbands that they want to leave, that they're both divorcing. And they get a bit drunk and they agree to murder each other's husbands. And the book is essentially what happens from there. So very good premise. Did it live up to it? Well, yes and no. I think Amanda Craig is a fascinating writer because she is so aware of the sort of politics of the time, and she includes a lot of that in her writing, and I enjoy that about her writing style. But I think sometimes she sacrifices the story a bit for the sake of drumming some points home, and I think that those points are, you know, very important points to make, but I think sometimes the story is sacrificed a little bit. Saying that, this is a real page turner. I got very involved with what happened to the main character in it, and yeah, it's definitely one that I would recommend. So there we have it. Some of the wonderful summary reads that I've been reading over the last few months. I hope that these books will inspire you, if not for right now, but maybe for next summer's reading list, because I do think they're all brilliant choices for the summertime. But I'd love to hear about what you've been reading this summer. Have you read a book that just captured summer for you, that you really enjoyed? I'd love to know if you have. So do drop me a comment and let me know which books you've been really enjoying that are wonderful summer reads. But I'm so happy to be back. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up if you did. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. But I'll see you again very soon. Bye.